I'm just waiting to go on to my music lesson because I have other interests now besides food, which is really cool. I also have this graze on my face because I've tripped over some uneven footpath and hit my head. So walking is not one of the things that I enjoy doing. But yeah, I'm really enjoying these music lessons, and yeah, I just have so much more headspace now than I used to. But I also feel like going through a period of thinking about recovery a lot is kind of necessary for recovery. I don't know, in the last few months, I've really found myself thinking about other things and enjoying other things, but for probably the first year of committed recovery, a lot of my time and headspace was taken up with researching anorexia and reading about how to recover and eating and dealing with that anxiety. It takes up a lot of energy, a lot of cognitive bandwidth, if you like, and I think if I hadn't gone through that, I would not be at the point where I am today, where I can eat so much more freely and think less about my body and more about my interests. I think I've identified kind of 3 phases in my recovery up to this point in terms of the mental freedom that I've been able to develop. So at the start of recovery, I was totally food focused. All my energy went into my recovery, and I think that was necessary for me. I did not have the headspace or the energy to think about other things, to develop other hobbies. And I guess I think that recovery is so taxing. It's such a mental battle that it really does take a lot of energy to commit to it every day, every meal, every snack. And I found that if I distracted myself by doing other things or trying to get involved in groups or clubs or working things, I would fall back in my recovery because every day I had to renew that commitment at the start of recovery, and that did mean educating myself and just spending a lot of time thinking about eating disorders, which I didn't like. I felt at the time like I was a really boring person because that's all I was thinking about, and that's all I would talk about with my family is, different way, like recovery. That was everything. I wanted to do other things, but at the same time I was exhausted, and I could not afford to distract myself from my goals at that point, which were to eat lots, gain weight, and get to a good place in my recovery. So I guess that's sort of the first phase that I'm talking about, is when your mind is totally focused on recovery and eating disorders and food. And yeah, I didn't like it, but I do think I 2 things to say here. One, I think I was incredibly privileged to have the time and the support and the space to be able to focus on recovery almost entirely for quite a decent portion of time. And second, I think taking that time out from study and putting all that focus into recovery has really set a good foundation for where I'm at now, which feels quite far removed from that place, if I'm honest. Thank goodness. The second phase that I've identified is this sort of transition phase, which Megzy Recovery has talked about when you're taking off like an itchy jumper, which is your eating disorder, or a wet jumper, and it feels uncomfortable and you know you have to get rid of it, and you've taken it off, but there's this brief transition period before you put on the nice jumper, which is your recovered life. And so there's in that transition phase, I noticed I wasn't thinking so much about food anymore. I wasn't thinking as much about recovery. Eating had become a bit more of a habit. It didn't take quite as much energy, still a lot, but not quite as much. I would go to sleep at night, and when I was lying in bed, my thoughts wouldn't be of food, which was amazing, but at the same time I didn't know what else to think about, and it's kind of frightening. So in this phase, it's scary because you feel like you're letting go of the eating disorder, but that's kind of been your identity for a while, and you can't quite see what your new life is gonna look like, and you start to sort of question, like, what how do I live without my eating disorder? How do I live without my old safety net? It's honestly, it's really scary. For so long, my thoughts had all been around food, weight, exercise, and then all of a sudden, I'm not so preoccupied with that. But I also don't know what to occupy myself with. And I guess what I want to say about this phase is that it is fairly short-lived. At the time, it feels scary, and that it might endure. It doesn't. It is pretty short-lived, maybe a couple of months in my case. It's really important that you don't rush back to your eating disorder because you're fearful of what your future is going to look like. But I don't think every person's eating disorder starts out as a way of seeking control. I think they start for primarily biological reasons. But when you are in the eating disorder, there's no doubt that it does feel like you have some control. Like, if I eat this amount, this is what I will weigh, sort of thing. And that's kind of reassuring. And then when you let go of that, you're losing that control, and so it can feel really uncomfortable to be leaving that behind. But you have to stick with it. You can't return to your eating disorder because there's a reason you left that behind and why you went through that whole first phase of committing to recovery, and you can't let that go. And I also think it's important to be gentle with yourself, be self-compassionate. It's okay if you don't know what the future looks like for you. In this phase for me, I had given up a study program. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I didn't know if I wanted to work. I didn't know if I wanted to go back to study. It's important not to rush the process and not to force yourself into something that you're not ready for. Realizing that I had a bit more energy, a bit more headspace, I thought, well, I should be getting a job, I should be working, I'm just wasting time now, I don't need to be full-time in recovery anymore. But actually, you're still in early days, and you're rewiring your brain. Let's not underestimate the toll that takes and the time it takes. So if you can keep going in full-time recovery, or just, you know, limiting your commitments for a while, then I think that in the end that's really beneficial. And I am incredibly grateful that I had almost an entire year off from study to focus on recovery, so that I could navigate through the initial phase and the second transition phase and work out what I actually wanted to do, rather than rushing into something that I ended up not enjoying, not knowing how to cope, and ending up back with my eating disorder. So take your time if you can. The phase doesn't last forever, and then you get into this third phase, which, okay, maybe there are 4 phases, but I'm just gonna go with 3 because that's what I started with. The third phase, where you're out of the transition and you start to think about your future, you start to think about goals that you have, you rediscover hobbies and passions, and for me that's looked like returning to study but in a completely different field, making new friends, and returning to volunteer work that I hadn't had time or energy to do during the hard parts of recovery. And I recently started music lessons again, and reading a lot, and just and thinking so much less about food and weight and exercise. Now, if I'm thinking about food, I know that means I need to eat, so I eat, and then I move on. Eating doesn't feel like such a huge part of my day anymore. It doesn't take as much time. It doesn't feel like something really special or like I have to earn it. And it's really nice. For a long time, I couldn't imagine letting go of my eating disorder and letting go of restriction, because just eating had become like the best part of my day, which is really sad. But like, going through restriction and then eating just felt like a special event, and I didn't know what could possibly replace that high that you get from restricting for a long time and then feeling able to eat. It's not real happiness. And what I have now, I feel so much better. It's just an enduring sort of contentment, and I feel joy and I feel sad, and those days are hard, but you can cope with it without your eating disorder. And there's no way I want to go back to my eating disorder, because where I'm at now, 18 months in, following that total recovery focus, following that transition phase, this feels like a place I could not have imagined for myself. I don't think I'm fully recovered yet, but I feel like I can see full recovery for myself now. It's so worth it. I hope that you are doing well. I'll record again soon. Lots of love to you. Bye.